It kind of feels like the last few years, more and more facilities and vendors are kind of figuring out things to not let agencies bill for. Now, that may or may not equate to you getting paid for some things, or it might mean a decreased pay amount for things like orientation and things that, again, we're going to call it unbillable BS. So we're going to talk about unbillable BS on today's episode of Travel Evolved. It's Travel Evolved. Welcome to the episode, everyone. I'm Mark Holloway. Unbillable BS. There's no other real way to explain this. And again, this is not going to be an incredibly long episode because it just isn't a huge amount of things that fall into this category. But again, back a year and a half ago when the team was putting some episodes together, this was one of those things we said, we got to do something that explains to the traveler what we can and what we can't bill for, and just kind of, I think, for lack of better theme, this is kind of one of those episodes that's going to go along with, some misnomers about the industry, some things that just aren't true, some fables, so to speak. I want to kind of clear the air about what we are able to bill for and what we also aren't able to bill for as well. And that also oftentimes means, why is it that agencies are not paying you or paying you at a reduced rate or struggling or tap dancing around being able to pay you for hours that it looks to you and feels to you and probably is to you like you're working. So at any rate, it's kind of a fun episode because it just kind of points out how, it feels like as time has gone by in our industry that facilities primarily are getting more and more clever about how to keep money in the facilities and not in a traveler's pockets. Just, let's start off today's episode by just talking about the fact that, listen, I think we all get it. If we were to have an honest conversation just between traveler and travel agency, we would admit that we know facilities, we and you guys together, this industry is the most expensive way to staff a facility. It's why it's temporary. It's why they do everything they can to not staff you, in all fairness to them, because it is expensive. If they had their choice, they would never use a traveler. If they had their choice, they certainly wouldn't try not to use a per diem traveler or per diem person. I almost said per diem nurse, but obviously this show is for allied professionals every bit as much as it is for nursing. It is less expensive, usually, for a per diem and daily kind of, substitution, so to speak, of staffing. But if they had their choice, they would hire either from a different part of the country or out of school, and they would never, ever have to spend the big hourly bill rate that they do, in fact, pay us, whether or not a vendor is taking 5%, and therefore most of it hopefully is translated to you, the traveler. It works in our industry. I don't think if you asked a hospital, I don't say don't think, I know if you asked a facility, they would say it's an absolute necessary evil because there's a shortage. There's a shortage in healthcare providers. After this past year or so, whether it be burnout or people having to take vaccines they chose not to, we know that there was a decreased amount of people still left, not only in healthcare, but certainly in travel healthcare. Now, qualify that by saying we also think and we believe, it's hard to know statistics until years go by, that there was also a lot of people that jumped into travel and supplemental staffing and per diem type staffing or contractual staffing because it was so lucrative. So time will tell what kind of panned out. But the fact is that it is a very, very expensive way for hospitals to staff their facilities. So I guess the 400-pound elephant or the 800-pound gorilla in the room is that I understand, I think we all could say before we even start this episode that the things I'm going to point out today on this episode, we all get that they're trying everything they can to eliminate cost and to reduce cost for a traveler. That being said, it still kind of stinks because, as always, the end penalty oftentimes is the traveler. But I do want to defend us agencies here and there. I do that every once in a while. I do think also it's important to understand that they also make it so that the agency is also penalized, sometimes more so than even the traveler, for the things we're going to talk about today. In other words, we can't bill for a lot of the things we're talking about today. And there are some times when we still pay because we want to make sure we're keeping you motivated. We want to make sure that we're, compensating somehow and legally for hours worked, even though we can't bill, or billing at a reduced rate for sure. So it kind of stinks for both of us that are primarily watching this episode. Obviously, this show is mostly travelers. I do know that there are a number of people that are on my side of the business that have started tuning into us because they want to know what I'm yapping about. Oh, there goes the phone. And I also know that there are some vendors, and I do know that there are some facilities and hospitals and higher-ups that have started watching this too, because I think all of us can come together and evolve what we're doing. So what am I talking about? I'm going to jump into some of the big ones, and I think this episode will get a little bit more vanilla-y as we go, but we'll see, because I think it's important to hear everything we're going to talk about. But I just want to make that acknowledgement that I understand, of course, a facility is going to want to reduce their costs. A vendor, by the way, doesn't always have the motivation to want to reduce the cost because they do make a percentage of what we're making. In other words, they make as much money, or they make money off the hours that we work as well. So I get it, and I just wanted to acknowledge it. Real quick, I want to tell you guys thank you. Recently, our viewership has gone up. We're plopping around on different social media. People are starting to recognize what we're doing here. I can't thank you guys enough. I can't thank you guys enough for mostly spreading the word as to what we're doing. Like I've said, this is not the end-all, be-all of your education and your involvement as a traveler. I still will tell you that I think the best source of education for you guys is each other. I really believe that. I'm hoping that what we're offering is a slight, like I always said, wedge into that piece of information that has been kind of kept away from you or hidden from you from an agency standpoint as to how does this stuff really work in the big picture. I think it creates confusion sometimes on your part. It creates a story or an exaggeration, not necessarily your fault, but when people don't know what the real answer is, they tend to kind of guess and make up their own story, and it tends to cause, in my opinion, problems and myths, like I always say in the industry, which really does hurt us. I think the more together we come, the more open and honest we all can be, everybody wins, especially those agencies that embrace transparency and embrace openness, which I just kind of feel like there's not that many of us out there. I think that good agencies and even agencies you guys like that aren't transparent are going to have to start to become that way, because the more people that understand and understand the questions you guys want to start asking, the more agencies are going to be forced to start having to answer those questions. And the more informed you guys are, the better your questions are. And at some point, an agency can't ignore you. They got to be able to answer honestly the question. And I don't know why they can't answer it honestly. Here's exactly how much money we as an agency are making. Here's where else it's going. And this is what the industry is. And be proud of it if you're an agency. Okay, off my soapbox. The biggest one I want to talk about. There is a few vendors and a few hospital systems that are notorious for basically getting free upfront online orientation on your back, on your time, and some of it's pretty extensive, before you have even entered your first day of orientation. And this is Unbillable. You guys know what I'm talking about. There are systems that mandate and require you to do online, basically, for lack of a better word, I call it online orientation. It is watching videos sometimes. It is answering questions. It may be very facility specific. It's oftentimes system or vendor specific, but it is time consuming. Some of them are really insane. Some of them are better. Some of them have gotten better. But all of you know what I mean. You are sometimes forced to do some sort of a training module, for lack of a better word, online that is free to the facility. This is one where I barely ever see an agency even offering to pay you any money for, because we don't get to bill not one single penny for this. So what you've got is you've got a recruiter and a person in the credentialing department that's doing their best to sell you or convince you that this is in your best interest. And I will say that in the end, it's required, right? We can't say no, or you don't have the assignment. So you have to make a decision whether that is worth it to you. My answer to you is that if the assignment pays well, if it's in a location and everything makes sense, you have to bite the bullet on these ones, and oftentimes, and decide whether this makes sense for you to spend these 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10, depending on how fast and how good you are getting them done, the time of that, to be able to decide if this makes sense to you to finish or start the assignment. I've seen it where people have said, no, it's not worth it to me. Some people struggle with this kind of thing, this online stuff. They really lose focus. It's hard for them. And I've had travelers say, this isn't worth it to me. Or I've had travelers that in principle are so against this that it makes them so frustrated and so angry that they have declined these sorts of positions or don't even apply to them with any agency as a matter of principle. For many of these, I will tell you that oftentimes what you're doing once will stay for a year or even 2 years. In other words, if you work with one facility, if you work with one agency and a job that's in this system, you can do another 2 or 3 or even more of those with either that agency or a different agency, because they do keep your record on file. And once you've done it, you've kind of done it, oftentimes. So there is a bigger picture, so to speak. And again, not any judgment from me. This is about whether or not it's worth it to you. If it's in a state or an area or a system in the country that you repeatedly or see yourself wanting to take assignments through frequently, then I would look at the bigger, long-term year-round employment through that vendor or through that system, and the 5 hours or whatever, let's just say 5 to 10 hours that you're going to spend to get through this training module or upfront pre-orientation modules, and decide whether or not that's worth it for you. I mean, it really is a case-by-case scenario. I could easily make the claim for both sides. I mean, personally, again, if you aren't doing this or you refuse to do it, totally your decision, you will be closing the door on a percentage, whatever that is, of positions that are available to you nationally. Like it or not, it's one of those things. Now, I will share with you, as you guys know, I'm a dinosaur. I remember about 10 years ago, I inadvertently saw an email thread from one of these companies, and they'll remain on. I don't want to get any attorney letters coming my way, that basically admitted that this was just a way to get some orientation done up front without having to have to charge the facility or the system. It was quickly retracted, but I will tell everybody out there, I mean, this was a way, admittedly, and I'm sure any facility or system or vendor with any, worth its weight would say, yeah, it is. I mean, just would admit it. This is an opportunity for a hospital to cut down on time spent in the hospital orientation and, of course, billing for that. So again, I will tell you that most companies, as a matter of fact, I don't personally know of a company, including mine, that pays you for these hours. And maybe there are out there. If there are, my hat's off to them. I'll cover how they're able to do that here down the road. But it just kind of stinks. For lack of a better word, whenever any of my people are talking to somebody that's going into the system, it's just again, communication is key. It's an upfront conversation saying, hey, here's what's coming. Here's what you don't like about it, admittedly. And I've even said out of my own mouth that I think it's free orientation and I think it sucks and it stinks. But this is what it is. And I just think that's the better way to communicate it. Give the traveler the information and let them decide whether or not this is worth it. That's the best way, in my opinion. As always, communicating is key. Put the information on the traveler's hands and let he or she decide if they're upset enough about this to say they don't want the assignment anymore. But I also think talking about it up front before you're even submitted to a position like this is half the battle, and knowing who not to burn your bridge with or waste your time with. If it's just one of those things that on principle you don't want to do. So there's that. But again, it's all about what value this system or this vendor has with you. And for a lot of you, it's absolutely worth it. Like it or not, and a lot of you have admitted to me, I don't like it, but I do it because I want the longer term opportunity for the year. And these vendors that hold these kinds of, I guess, offline or upfront education, they understand, they know it, and they've rolled the dice and said, we're going to do this. I don't think that they believe that most of us agencies are compensating anyway for it, but I will say in defense of maybe my potential ignorance, I'm sure there's probably an agency or two out there that somehow compensate you either a lump sum or an hourly amount to get this done. But I'm telling you, as we've always said, nothing is free. It's coming out of your compensation because they can't bill. And there's no magical seed or formula that allows one agency to bill for this on the same system, or there isn't, unless they're being completely dishonest, which they're not. That means they're not billing, so they are absolutely not doing this. They're not giving you that $10 or that $500 or whatever they're offering to pay you. It's not free. It's coming from your bigger compensation. So that's I think the biggest one I want to cover. It is not, I would always say, don't shoot the messenger. I will defend every agency out there that has to have this discussion with a traveler. It's not fun. I just hope that they're having it up front, because having it after you've accepted the assignment and you've gotten ready, you've signed your, whatever it is, your assignment detail, your contract with that company, you've turned down or been pulled from every other submission with that company and other companies you're planning on working for because you got your job, and then to find out at the 11th hour that this exists, that would stink. So I hope that at least they're having that conversation with you up front. The other big one for me, probably the whole two reasons I want to do this episode, is more and more facilities, systems, and vendors are carving out a huge amount of your actual orientation hours as unbillable to us agencies. I really want you to hear that. The way you guys sometimes get this communicated to you is that your agency will tell you, hey, for the first 8 hours or 12 hours or whatever that system is having, or has dictated, we're only going to be able to pay you, and I've seen this to be, I'm just using common terms, $10 an hour, or we can't pay you at all, or we're going to pay you a total of, whatever, $250, and then once you're past those things, then we're going to be able to pay your normal fee or your normal pay. What am I trying to say? I got distracted because my phone went off. Your normal compensation. The reason why that is the case is because there are a number of systems, vendors, and just straightforward facilities that have said you cannot bill for the first X amount of hours of orientation. That also stinks. Let me defend the facility and let me defend the vendor, because I do think it's important on Travel Evolve that we talk big picture stuff. The reason that many of them do this is because of the problems industry-wide in travelers, for multitude of reasons, not finishing an assignment. It could be because they're fired, so I'm not blaming us all on you guys, but it could also be because of lack of commitment or clinical ability, or the manager interviewed too fast and the person wasn't set up. For whatever reason, the amount of travelers that do not finish, whether it be hospital terminated or traveler terminated or agency terminated, a 13-week assignment has affected a hospital's willingness to spend this kind of money without patient care being involved, if that all makes sense. In other words, they're figuring out, you know what, we're going to do 8 hours or 12 hours of orientation because on average, that's about how much we're eating every time a traveler gets fired, or we fire a traveler, or they quit, or they walk off, or they don't even show up and we have to go out and get another traveler when we waited 2 or 3 weeks for that traveler to start. So I'm qualifying that. This is why, and again, I'm going to ask you guys to use some emotional intelligence and say, on occasion, and this is one of them, I would consider, if you're going to be angry about the fact that this has evolved and has become part of our thing in our industry, there is traveler responsibility as much as there is anybody else's responsibility on this one issue, because they have been forced to realize that a lot of travelers, for those variety of reasons, don't finish an assignment. So there's a cost there. Imagine being a facility, imagine being the CFO of a facility, and you have to justify that 1 out of every 20, one out of every 30, one out of every 10, depending on how strong your facility is. Travelers that start an orientation and work a week or 2 or 3 or 4 don't finish the 13 weeks. So you spent all this money letting an agency bill you, let an agency paying a traveler, and you barely got your money's worth out of patient care, which is, we all know, where the money comes from. So that's why they're doing it. It is a absolute, it's a money saver. So let's have that kind of honest language. But it is also somewhat understandable if you really are able to pull yourself out of the, right in the mix, which you guys all are, and understand that it is the history of hopefully other travelers and the experience that facilities have had that they're trying to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't really fair. And maybe it's on us. Like I said, maybe we're not interviewing well as a hospital. Maybe we're doing these auto offers we've seen so frequently. But for whatever reason, when I look at the 13 weeks of patient care we're getting from a traveler, it's reduced by 8 hours or 12 or 13 hours of what we're actually getting. So we've decided to say we're not going to pay for orientation. Shouldn't say that. We're not going to pay for a certain amount of orientation. And it's becoming more and more common. 8 hours and 12 hours, 10 hours. It's not the whole orientation. It's not a full week. I haven't seen that yet, knock on wood. But 8 hours is on the low end, is very, very common with a lot of folks saying that you can't bill the first 8 hours of an orientation. Now, what most agencies do, and I can't speak for everybody, but what most agencies do is they do one of a couple things. Well, they do one of 3 things, really. Either they don't pay at all, which is tough, but hopefully you got a great compensation for the rest of the assignment, which I guess I would understand that if a company said, we're not going to pay you at office orientation, you agreed to that, and you probably have to put it in writing because there could be issues with you working and not being compensated for every hour you're working. But if you've agreed to that, I would say in my mind as a traveler, I would be okay with it, provided that I'm making more money than everybody else that's working for different agencies for the rest of the assignment. In other words, you're taking the risk too. I'm going to show you that I'm worth it. I'll be willing to risk that I won't get fired, over 13 weeks for clinical ability or whatever, and I'll eat that 8 hours because I'm going to make a lot more money in the long run. I guess that's one good way of looking at it. A lot of agencies will offer a reduced rate. We're going to pay you $10 an hour or whatever that figure is. I've seen that a lot, so I use that. $10 an hour for the first 8 hours, then you click right into your normal compensation going from there. It's a way for them to basically eat $10 plus payroll taxes every hour without having to be able to bill anything. So it is a complete expense. But like I've said, even that little $10 an hour, I'm sure for any smart agency, and they're all pretty smart, has figured out a way to kind of incorporate that into your total compensation. The third way is that you see your pay getting hit normally from the first hour through the rest hour, and you may not even know that they're not being able to bill for a certain amount of hours. And not all facilities do this, not all systems do this. It's definitely less than half. I would say ballparky, it's maybe 20 to 25% of every assignment I have that doesn't allow for some kind of an orientation hourly bill rate to be billed. Most of those companies are still figuring out, okay, instead of, and you guys know my magical number, instead of, and again, on a 36-hour work week, 36 hours times 13 weeks is 468. So in our calculation, what an agency may do is say, all right, we're going to base everything on 460 hours and see what that compensation looks like. It's only going to reduce it by literally pennies, less than 50 cents an hour on normal billing times, so not pandemic stuff. So it's not going to reduce what they're offering you, but that way, yes, if they're paying you on 2 weeks that way and you end up getting, quitting or getting terminated, they've kind of buffered that, so to speak. Agencies always lose money or don't make the money they should be making if someone quits early. You guys don't either. Everybody loses when the assignment doesn't get fulfilled. But the assignment, everyone wins when you work more than 468 hours, or if you're on a 40-hour work week, it's 520. 40 hours times 13 is 520. So they may say we're only going to do it by 512. They'll take those 8 hours out and calculate there. So one of those 3 ways is typically how an agency handles that unbillable BS for the orientation. In other words, they're figuring it out. A vendor thinks that they're going to save some money, and they kind of are. But at the end of the day, what they're really doing is any agency that understands how this stuff works, and we all do, is reducing the compensation, which means they're reducing their fulfillment. So a hospital may think they're really getting some free hours, but is it really free? Because An agency has reduced what they're offering a traveler by that small number of pennies, but it does mean that there are travelers that are passing on assignment because it doesn't look like it pays enough over the course of 13 weeks. So they're not really gaining a lot, if you kind of understand what I'm saying. Hospitals not necessarily gaining money. They may be losing fulfillment by doing that because agencies have countered that lack of 8 hours of billing with a reduction in compensation for the traveler. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, unbillable BS, right? All right, so here's, I want to make sure I can kind of explain this one to you. And this is I told you, the episode's those are the two biggest ones, by the way, for me. So rather than me holding the big stuff to the end, I want to talk about that one. Here's some other things you guys may not be aware of. And I think it's important, again, with respect to giving you guys full information. The more you know about our side of the desk, the more strong of a traveler you're going to be because you're going to get it. You're not going to be as upset, or you're going to understand, which is what my whole goal of a lot of this is, or part of the goal I'm trying to explain. Here's one you may not know. I wouldn't necessarily call it unbillable BS, but what is difficult for some of us lots of times, we do have vendors that oftentimes will take an additional 2 to 4% reduction off of their pay from our invoices for what they call fast pay, which means if they pay an invoice basically before it's really due. Most of our invoices are based on a net 30, by the way. It's rare when we get paid in 30 days. I have seen over the last few years, a couple of our different vendors are really working to pay quicker, but they're also deciding that, hey, because we're actually adhering to the terms of the invoice that we've already agreed to, we now are going to arbitrarily and tell you we're going to take a 2% reduction of that invoice because we're paying you fast, but it's really that we're paying you on time. It's hard for us agencies, at least it's hard for me, maybe some of the other guys have figured out, if you aren't sure if that's consistent, then it's hard to calculate that in when you're trying to calculate your margins. In other words, again, if you see that repeatedly, and here's true transparency as always from me, if I know an agency is going to take if I know a vendor is going to take 2% more every single time they pay an invoice, I'm going to reduce the whole entire pie by 2% before I calculate my margin because it's not a real number. They're not paying for 2%. So for every $100 bill rate, there's $2 that they're keeping for every single hour that you work. If it's $100 bill rate in that example, and it's a 36-hour work week, that's $72 every week that they're keeping. To me, that means we're never going to get that $72. So why is it even part of our equation? So anybody who, again, has been in this industry long enough that sees that consistently, we're going to reduce our real invoice by that 2% and say that's not even a real number. We're only going to get 98% of what we're expecting. So it's where it becomes difficult is those vendors that kind of do this sometimes when they pay quick and they don't. It's a hard one. But you guys should know that. So sometimes, even though you've got, let's just say, a $100 bill rate, and I've told you guys in episodes previously, and if you haven't listened to what I've talked about, this is your first episode, please go back and listen to the first 71. If a vendor is taking 5% on a $100 bill rate, you're already at $95. Really what we're seeing. We're now really seeing only a $95 bill rate. If they're taking another 2% discount, that means we're only seeing a $93. It's not 2% of 95, it's 2% of the actual 100, which means we're now seeing a 93% of that invoice, which means $93. So that 93 is really what our pie has. We instead of say 100, we say 93, and we calculate our margin based upon that, and we calculate everything else based upon $93, not on 100. So you should know that it's not unbillable BS, but it's kind of unreceivable BS if that explains it at all. All right, some of the more vanilla ones, and I'm gonna go quick because I don't think this episode is one that we need to spend a lot of time, but I want you guys to finish listening to this because I want you to understand stuff. It'll help you. I've seen people complain about mandatory staff meetings and how they have to be called in or they have to stay late because of a meeting. On occasion, I've seen facilities offer to put that on the Kronos report and pay for it. I have seen times when they don't. Again, this is no different than your lack of guarantee. If it's happening to you a lot, you should talk to your agency, talk to your recruiter, find out if this is something that you can expect to happen. Previously, did they know about that? Was there good communication? these things always stink if it happens after the fact. You're already there and you're being called in on your day off for an hour-long meeting. You have to go to the hospital and you're not actually be able to put that in your Kronos report. That's, in my opinion, unbillable BS. We should be able to bill for that. If they're keeping you or calling you in, you should be able to bill for that. Now, if it's a disciplinary situation or an inquisitory situation where they're trying to find out what was going on, or maybe there could be some problems they want to check to see if whether it's a shortage or you guys know where I'm going. I think that's a little different. I think that it's going to be on a rare occasion. And I think that it's worth it for you to go in and defend yourself and explain your side of the story and make sure that everything's okay. I wouldn't call that necessarily BS, but it's still going to be unbillable. All right, so here's the bottom line on a lot of stuff. If you can't bill for any hours, I just described 2 huge ones, and I'm going to go through a few more. If you can't bill, my question for you guys is, if your agency's not billing, how is it that they're paying? I already explained how they're doing it for, potentially for an orientation where you don't see any difference in your pay. It's the same pay from the first hour to the end. The question is, it's got to be built into their margins. You guys should know this. And let's talk about, for example, like when an OR is closed for a holiday, a very, very common one. I've seen this where, I'll get a PACU nurse or an operating room nurse or a surgical technician or a sterile processing tech, an anesthesia tech are saying, hey, my OR is closed. It's Thanksgiving. We're closed Thursday and Friday, and I want to be paid for that because it's closed. And there are agencies that say, okay, absolutely, here's your 16 hours worth of work for those 2 days. Rather than skipping off to the bank and not questioning it, what I would like some of you more evolved travelers to start thinking about is, how is it that I know if we're not open, and by the way, you guys should know this, we cannot bill for those hours. I have yet to see a facility that says our OR was closed, here's 16 free hours. No, what they say is you cannot bill. We're not going to pay any invoice for that. You can decide what you want to do with that traveler. And I think there are more agencies that say, hey, you didn't have to work in the OR, for example, but you also, you don't get paid, but you got a 5-day weekend or a 4-day weekend or a 3-day weekend, depending upon when the holiday falls. If it's a Monday or a Friday, that's how some agencies deliver it. Other agencies say, yeah, here's 16 hours. It's really easy, like I said, to run off the bank and not question it, but you really should be questioning more so the agency that offers to pay you for what you now know is unbillable. Why can my agency pay me for those 16 hours when I know that they weren't able to bill? And if you don't know, ask the director of surgical services in this case. Hey, was my agency able to bill for those hours or not? They paid me, so I'm not asking that. I'm not, they make it kind of weird wanting to know why you're asking that question. But ask them. Most of these directors will tell you, no, they can't. We can't bill for that. They don't bill for that. Or I don't know. Go ask HR. When you find out that your agency was not able to bill for the hours, the first thing should be, wow, so they paid me, which means it wasn't free because I've listened to Mark and I know that in our industry, nothing is free. So clearly this was calculated in, and it was that I'm probably getting paid $1 or $2 less over my entire assignment to incorporate all of us few travelers that actually have some time off and are being canceled or being called off once or twice during a shift, during an assignment because it was unbillable. So the question is, how much should I really be making? And again, there's no judgment here. I don't know if either one of them is right, but I just don't like the lack of transparency of making it seem like your agency is going to bed for you and paying you all this money. I just think it's disingenuous. I think they should say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're paying you, but it's because we knew this was going to happen, on Thanksgiving, potentially at Christmas, potentially on New Year's, and because it all falls on a Thursday or a Friday or some weekday. So we knew that, so we incorporated that. I just don't like when an agency makes it feel like they're doing something for you when you guys and I know we're really not. The industry just is not set up for free gifts because, like I've shared with you before on different episodes, our margins shouldn't be thick enough that we're able to incorporate free stuff, especially 16 hours at what a compensation is right now. That's a ton of money, and it's not free. I'm telling you, agencies are not just saying, okay, for every OR person that's employed in the OR, allied or nursing, we're just going to eat that. Come on, you guys know better than that. We're not. We're not eating that. That is not free money. So that's the question you should be asking. I wonder what else I'm not getting. I just would prefer it if an agency said, hey, yep, you know what? We can't bill for that. We've choosing to pay you, or we're choosing not to pay you. But here's the communication again up front as to how this really works. And it's remarkable how many people in that category, I'm just talking about operating room employees that work in an OR that when it's closed, get a different story from every single agency, when the truth is the story is really the same. It's the spin of the story that's really different. Okay, so I kind of given you what I wrote down here, another quick lesson in margins. I just kind of did that. Here's the other solution I wrote, and I'm just going to say it, another quick lesson in volume and how agencies utilize that. So here's the other thing I will also kind of say. The bigger your agency, in other words, the more travelers that they have at any given time on the road, in other words, how many travelers they employ, if they're larger, it does and should incorporate more revenue. Now, they didn't get big by giving away the ship. But if you're talking about, let's say, one of the big guys and gals out there that have thousands of travelers working for them, they have the flexibility oftentimes to do some things that truly actually are quote unquote free. And I'm going to wink with that because it's kind of debatable. But you guys also know from listening to me that their margins are notoriously thicker and your pay rates are notoriously thinner across the board for every assignment. So they're making more money per traveler. And if you don't believe me, just ask somebody that's working for them. That's why those big guys and gals are so popular with brand new travelers, because they haven't figured out that, wait a minute, everybody else is, if I just leave those areas where they've kind of got monopolies, I can make more money through other agencies. And we've already told you how you can actually sometimes make more money through another agency that's subcontracting through the big guys because their margins are so darn big. So volume can oftentimes lead to free, but I'm not going to call it free because you're paying for it every hour you're working for that agency, and so is every other thousands of traveler every single hour. So we're talking huge revenue. So that's my quick lesson in volume and how some really good agencies utilize that to make it feel like they're doing you something great. And I've seen it there on Facebook. My agency paid me when my operating room was free, and it was so awesome. Where I got free paid vacation because I worked my fanny off for them an entire year and got, basically all my hours in, and I was able to get a 2 weeks paid vacation. Yeah, well, because what you just said is true. You worked your fanny off for them, and you worked your fanny off them at a reduced rate, and they made more money than the average agency did off you. So that's why they're doing it. All right, so here's one that is kind of tough. I'm going to call it a cancellation before a contract starts. I have seen, and I've told you guys on Travel Evolved, that I have actually been charged by a vendor for someone backing out an assignment before they even went to go to the assignment. It's brutal. It's so infuriating to me, as if we have control over someone's disposition, someone's commitment. They want to make us believe that we do. And I do think that if they don't, if the attitude was that they didn't care if an agency had any sort of responsibility for a traveler going there, I could see how that could become messy and become a bit of a slippery slope, so to speak. But to actually think that we are in control of whether or not someone is committed to an assignment and isn't already looking for something else, or isn't, one of these people that does one of these maybe online modules that says, you know what, I don't want to do this, to charge us a fee, and they can because they have all of our accounts receivable with them. In other words, they've got hundreds of thousands of dollars oftentimes. So if they say, we're going to charge you $500, what are you supposed to say? No, you can't. When they pay the next invoice, they're going to reduce it by $500, and they're going to say this is because of this fee and this penalty, and there's nothing we can do about it. So that's why, again, sometimes I said in a few episodes back a month or so ago, agencies have done their best to start to incorporate scary language to you guys to stop you from accepting assignments and then canceling them. I would ask all of you to not do that. It really does hurt the entire industry. We already talked about a few things in this episode that travelers do that hurt other travelers. This is one of them. If you want to get after a traveler for a change on one of these Facebook groups, this is what I would tell you. Stop accepting every offer and then breaking that agency's hearts, because you're actually hurting me and every other traveler, because you're making agencies do things that they weren't doing 10 years ago because of the lack of commitment. So we're always going to react and figure out how we can do to protect ourselves, just like facilities are, just like you guys are. So stop accepting an offer if it's something, if you're not 100% sure. And if you accept an offer, have the integrity to say, I've accepted this and I'm going to be a good traveler. I'm not going to burn my bridge and I'm going to take it. Even if it's somebody else's and you're trying to work for my company, you still should do that. I have so much respect for a traveler that gets an offer with my company when maybe just accept an offer that day or early that day, and then they get another offer, an auto offer, like, oh, I just took a job. And they say, I can't. I have huge respect for that. I may not like it because, of course, I want them to go to work for me, but I'm never going to go, oh, come on. And I'm never going to pressure you or say you're going to be blackballed or DNR'd for my company because you accepted a job with somebody else prior to our offer. And I'm not going to even do it if you were looking at our offer and then, found somebody else that was paid more. Now, I don't like it when you take our offer and then you cancel and go to do something else. And I told you have to be careful because you're burning your bridge with companies that pay more than anybody else or that have more jobs. So be careful with that. Just a quick review of an episode we did a month or so ago. So cancellations without notice. In other words, when I say unbillable BS, what I meant when I wrote this down was that I don't like the fact that they can cancel you guys without notice and there is truly nothing that we're able to continue to bill. Now, I will defend some of these vendors, and one of them that I beat up about this whole online, pre-credentialing. Some of those vendors are also really, really good about saying we no longer need this traveler due to census because they have some seasonal places, and we're actually going to end this assignment in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I've seen as much as 4 weeks. I have a lot of respect for vendors and hospitals that do that because they don't necessarily have to. As I've told you, they run they have the money strings. They're holding the purse strings. So they can cancel you guys, as we've documented well here, whether your agency admits it or not, without notice. Some of these agencies that I just beat up for some of the things I don't like, I really like that about them, that they're at least saying, hey, our census is low, we're going to drop this traveler, but we're going to put a 2-week notice in right now, which gives them 2 weeks to find something else and get going. I do like that, and I hope you guys appreciate that too, because the fact is they don't really have to. So some of these agencies that don't do some things well turn right around and do other things, I think, really, really well. All right, so some of the things that I think is nuts, and you guys should know this again is less about you and more about what happens to us. But oftentimes when you guys don't clock in or clock out, it causes problems, right? I've seen Kronos reports, mostly from certain hospitals, not necessarily systems, where they're just notorious for not getting the punch in properly because something's not usually working with their clocking system. It's usually not the traveler. What happens a lot of times on these invoices that are what's the word I'm looking for? There's invoices that have not been approved and they're being debated on. There is we're not rejecting it. I'm not thinking very well. It's really late, by the way, when I'm recording this episode, at least giving the information off to the folks that are going to do this. So when it's disputed or there's a disputable invoice, I have seen some vendors that if it stays in dispute for a length of time, whether they're fixing it or moving it or not, they just say, well, this is what it is now. It's been past 30 days, so we are no longer going to even honor the dispute, and we're just going to pay this thing, which I think is total BS because they're actually the ones that are making it so we can't dispute it or they haven't reviewed it. I've seen that, and that's another one that just infuriates me because this ends up, again, eventually causing travelers and costing travelers money because we have to make a certain amount of our margin. I hope it's less than what it was a year ago. I hope it continues to actually be reduced by innovation and technology and boy, I'm really having trouble struggling with my words tonight, which is bad for a podcast host. The efficiency and effectiveness of our industry, as that becomes increased and we get rid of inefficient processes, I do hope that our margins shrink and your money increases. So all these things can get better when agencies aren't taking quite what we are right now when we're recording this episode in the fall of 2022. Lastly, I'll talk about some things that are unbillable. Obviously, sometimes when you have to go and do fit test, I've seen people that have said, oh, we don't have like a PAL certification or we don't have an ACLS, and everyone in our hospital, whether you've had to or not, has to have ACLS. I've seen psych nurses and med-surg nurses and even allied people be required to have ACLS at facilities, and travelers say, well, I want to get paid for taking that course. Now, whether or not your agency is paying for that for you, which I hope that they are, or they're not, it's still not really a billable situation. So I wouldn't call that unbillable BS. I would just call that unbillable. You're getting a certification, whether you're paying for it or not. Hopefully, like I said, you're not. Your agency is. I would look at it that way. I'm getting a free certification, and I don't need to get compensated for the time I'm there. But I've seen that a lot. You have that came up recently with a couple of travelers I've had. It stinks. It's not billable. You don't get to. It's almost like double dipping, but it's the way it works. And I understand asking for it because I would too. I would never. I'd always ask for everything if I was a traveler. Why not? You've been programmed that you feel like you have to ask for stuff. So you look at the big picture of what your company's providing for you. You look at the big picture of what they're not. And hopefully you found an agency that's providing good big picture stuff. That's why you're hopefully sticking with them, because every one of us does something so differently that what you're looking for as a traveler is someone that does the big picture right. And if you found them and they're paying you properly and you're happy, stick with them. You guys already do. But I'm telling you, the industry is going to get better. It just is. Already it's getting better because I think, like I said, things are changing and evolving. And a lot of it has to do with coming from you guys and you guys understanding how things truly work. And that's what this episode was about today. Understanding some things so that now when these situations come up for you, you're a little bit better equipped to decide how you're going to handle them. You've got a different side of the story. Whether you like this side of the story or not, I'm sure a lot of things I said tonight were kind of like, I'm not really sure I agree with Mark on that. Hopefully a lot of things I said you do agree with. But now you at least have the information to take it, process it, and be able to now utilize that when a situation we discussed comes up for you. Guys, as always, I really appreciate you tuning in. Thank you guys so much for the increased subscriptions and the increased views and listens on podcasts. I can't thank you enough. We're so jazzed up about what we're doing, and we appreciate each and every one of you. And I'll catch you next time on Travel Evolved.